My name is Renata. I was 27 when I learned that silence, if you carry it long enough, becomes a kind of architecture. It builds rooms inside you. Some of them you never open again. The porch light at my mother's house had a habit of flickering before it caught, like it needed a moment to decide whether it wanted to work. I used to stand under it as a girl, waiting for my sister Delphine to come home from wherever she'd disappeared to that week, watching the bulb hesitate the same way I hesitated to ask her where she'd been. That light was flickering the night everything changed. I remember the sound of the screen door, the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet, and Delphine standing in the frame with our mother's reading glasses pushed up into her hair, the same way our mother used to wear them. "You know this house should have been mine," she said. Not shouted. Delphine never shouted. She had a gift for saying cruel things in the tone of someone ordering coffee. I didn't answer right away. I was still holding the folder of paperwork I'd spent 3 weekends organizing: deed transfers, appraisal notices, the will our mother had left typed and signed 2 years before the stroke that took her from us slowly, then all at once. "Mom left it to both of us," I said. "Mom left it to whoever showed up," Delphine said. "You were just better at showing up." That wasn't true, and she knew it wasn't true, but truth had never been the currency Delphine dealt in. She dealt in impressions. In the story she needed people, needed herself, to believe. "I built a life somewhere else," she went on, stepping past me into the hallway like she already owned it. "I don't need your guilt trip about who visited more. I need this house. I have a buyer lined up for my restaurant space, and the bank wants collateral. This is collateral, Renata. This is the only thing Dad ever left worth anything." I stood very still. There is a particular stillness that comes over a person when they realize a conversation has stopped being about love and started being about leverage. "So sell your half," I said quietly. "There is no half once I sign," she said. "That's how liens work. You'll get bought out.
Cheap.
Or," and here she smiled, the smile she used to give me when we were children, and she was about to say something she knew would sit in me for years, "or you could just disappear. Go build your little life somewhere else too. God knows this town never needed 2 of us. Disappear forever." She didn't use those exact words that night. She circled them, the way she circled everything, letting me fill in the ending myself. But I understood her. I understood the shape of what she wanted, for me to fold quietly, the way I always had, so she could walk away with the one thing that mattered to her, proof, finally, that she had won something. I didn't cry that night, though I wanted to. I went out to the porch and stood under the flickering light and thought about my mother's hands, how they used to smooth my hair back when I was small and frightened, and how she never once, in all her careful love, taught either of us how to fight for ourselves without becoming cruel in the process. I would have to learn that on my own. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and coffee gone cold in a carafe nobody refilled. Mr. Holloway had handled my mother's affairs for 11 years, and when I called him the morning after Delphine's visit, his voice had the particular gentleness of a man who has delivered difficult truths to grieving families more times than he can count. "You want to know exactly what the will says," he said. "Not what your sister told you it says." "Yes." He read it to me slowly, the actual language, the kind that doesn't bend to memory or motive. The house, our childhood home on Larkspur Lane, was left to both of us, in equal and undivided shares, with a single stipulation our mother had added in her own handwriting on the margin of the final draft: neither daughter may force the sale of the property, without the written consent of the other, until 5 years have passed from my death. I sat with that for a long moment. Delphine hadn't mentioned the stipulation. Of course she hadn't. "She can't put a lien on it," I said slowly, understanding arriving the way understanding often does. Not as a lightning bolt, but as a tide coming in. "Not without me." "Not without you," Mr. Holloway agreed. "Which means, legally, she needs your signature for exactly what she's trying to do. I suspect that's why she came to you the way she did." I thought of Delphine's smile on the porch. Not a request. A performance of inevitability, designed to make me believe the outcome was already decided, so that I wouldn't bother contesting it. "There's something else," Mr. Holloway said, and I heard papers shifting. "Your mother left a letter. Sealed, meant to be opened only if," her words, "the girls come to disagree about the house." I have it here. Do you want me to read it, or would you rather come in? Read it, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He cleared his throat, and then I heard my mother's words for the first time in 2 years, delivered secondhand through a stranger's careful reading. Girls, if you're hearing this, it means the house has become a wound instead of a home, and that breaks something in me even now. I love this house because I raised you both in it, not because of what it's worth. Whichever of you is doing this out of fear, of scarcity, of being left behind, of never having enough, I forgive you before you even ask. But I need you to remember, I did not build a life so that either of you would tear each other down finishing it. Renata, you have always given more than you took. Don't let that become a habit that costs you everything. Delphine, you have always taken more than you needed. Don't let that become a hunger that costs you everyone. I sat in the quiet of that office and let myself cry, finally, 3 weeks of held breath leaving me at once. Not because the letter had told me anything I didn't already know about either of us, but because my mother had seen us both so clearly and had loved us anyway, and I understood for the first time that honoring her wasn't going to mean keeping the peace. It was going to mean telling the truth. It took me 4 days to find out who Delphine's buyer actually was. I wasn't trying to sabotage her, not yet. I told myself I was simply trying to understand the shape of what I was up against, the way you study a storm system before deciding whether to board the windows or evacuate. I called an old friend from college, Priya, who worked in commercial real estate finance, and asked her, carefully, what it would take for someone to use a house as collateral for a restaurant loan. Depends on the lender, Priya said. Some of the smaller regional banks will take residential property as collateral if the borrower has decent credit and the appraisal supports the loan amount. But if there's a co-owner who won't sign off, most banks won't touch it. Too much legal risk. What if the co-owner doesn't know there's supposed to be a signature? There was a pause on the line. Then somebody's committing fraud, Renata. That's not a gray area. I didn't sleep that night. I kept circling the word fraud, turning it over, trying to decide what kind of sister I would be if I let it happen versus what kind of sister I would be if I stopped it. Delphine had spent our whole lives certain that I would eventually give in, that my instinct to smooth things over, to avoid conflict, to keep the family whole even when it cost me pieces of myself, would win out over any boundary I tried to set. She wasn't entirely wrong to believe that. I had given in before. When she took the car our father left us and never once offered to share it. When she told our mother I'd encouraged her to drop out of nursing school, when the opposite was true, and I said nothing because correcting her would have meant a fight I didn't have the strength for. When she missed our mother's last coherent Christmas because a boyfriend needed her in another state, and I covered for her anyway, told our mother she was just running behind. I had spent a lifetime being the quiet scaffolding that let Delphine's version of events stand upright. But this letter, my mother's voice, forgiving us both in advance, asking only that we not tear each other down, sat differently in me than guilt ever had. It didn't ask me to yield. It asked me to be honest. So I called the bank listed on the appraisal notice Delphine had left, accidentally or carelessly, in a folder she'd asked me to sign without reading. I told them, calmly, that I was a co-owner of the property in question and that I had not consented to any lien, loan, or collateral arrangement involving the house. The loan officer went very quiet. We'll need to pause the application, she said. Thank you for calling. I hung up and sat in my kitchen with my hands flat on the table, waiting for the guilt to arrive the way it always had. It didn't come. What came instead was something closer to grief. Grief for the version of our relationship I had been protecting long after it stopped existing. Delphine called 19 times in one afternoon. I know because I counted, watching the phone light up on the counter while I did the dishes, some old habit of avoidance still running underneath the new resolve I was trying to grow into. On the 20th call, I answered. You went behind my back, she said. No greeting. Her voice had none of the porch-light smoothness from before. This was raw, fast, unrehearsed. You called my bank. Do you understand what you've done? That deal is dead. 2 years of work, dead because you couldn't just disappear? I said quietly. The silence on the other end told me she remembered saying it, even if she'd never said it in those exact words. That's not what I meant, she said, quieter now. I think it's exactly what you meant, I said. I think you've meant it for a long time. Every time I gave something up, so you wouldn't have to feel the consequences of your own choices, that's what you were really asking for me to keep shrinking, so you'd have more room. You don't know what my life has been like, she said, and there was real pain in it now, not performance. You got to be the good one. The reliable one. Do you know what that's like, growing up next to somebody the whole family already decided was better? I was never going to catch up to that, so I stopped trying to be good and started trying to win instead. I stood in my kitchen and felt something in my chest loosen, not because her pain excused anything, but because I finally understood it wasn't really about the house. It had never been about the house. It was about a scoreboard she'd been keeping since we were children, one I hadn't even known we were playing on. I'm not your competition, Delphine, I said. I never wanted to be. I just wanted a sister. She didn't say anything for a long moment. So what happens now? She finally asked. You going to make me grovel for my half? No, I said. I'm going to do what Mom's letter said. I'm going to tell you the truth instead of protecting you from it. You can't force the sale. You can't use the house as collateral without me. And I'm not going to keep quietly cleaning up after choices you make without me in a room. So we just, sit on a house neither of us can touch for 3 more years. Or, I said, surprising myself with the calm in my own voice, you let me buy out your half. Fair appraisal. A lawyer for each of us. No lien, no fraud, no disappearing. Just an honest transaction between 2 adults who happen to be sisters. The line was quiet for a long time. You'd actually do that, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I already started the paperwork, I said. I was waiting to see if you'd ask before I told you. The appraiser was a soft-spoken man named Curtis who walked through the house with a clipboard and a flashlight, checking the foundation, the roofline, the wiring in the attic that our father had never quite finished updating. I followed him from room to room, watching him note things I'd stopped seeing years ago. The crack in the plaster above the stairs shaped like a river delta, the kitchen tile my mother had chosen because it reminded her of the coast she grew up near and never returned to. Delphine came for the walkthrough too, though she stayed a few steps behind me the whole time, quieter than I'd ever known her to be. At one point, in the room that had been hers as a teenager, she stopped in the doorway and just looked at the walls for a long moment, walls I knew still had, under 3 coats of paint, the pencil marks where our mother had tracked our heights every birthday. I used to hate this room, she said, not quite to me. Too small. I always felt like you got the bigger one, because you were the good one. You got the bigger one, I said. I switched with you when I was 11 because you cried for 2 weeks about the window not facing the street. She turned and looked at me, and something crossed her face I hadn't seen in years. Not defensiveness, not performance. Something closer to shame. I don't remember that, she said. I know, I said. That's kind of the whole problem, isn't it? We didn't fight about it. We just stood there, 2 grown women in a room built for 2 little girls who used to be close before the world taught them to compete for things that were never actually scarce. Love, worth a mother's attention that, in truth, had always been wide enough for both of them. The appraisal came back fair. Curtis was thorough and unbiased, which was all I had asked for. My half of the buyout would take most of my savings and a modest loan, but it was honest money, earned and borrowed the right way, not built on a signature I never gave. I offered Delphine something I hadn't planned to offer. Not because Mr. Holloway required it, and not because guilt pushed me to it, but because my mother's letter kept returning to me, insistent as a tide, a small share of the sale price set aside, interest-free, that Delphine could use toward her restaurant if she came back with a legitimate loan application and let me co-sign as a guarantor instead of using the house as leverage behind my back. Why would you do that? She asked, suspicious. After everything? Because you're my sister, I said. Not because you've earned it. Because Mom asked us not to let this cost us everyone, and I'd rather lose some money than lose you completely. The closing happened on a gray Tuesday in October, in a small conference room that smelled like printer toner and the same cold coffee that seemed to follow every legal proceeding I'd been part of that year. Mr. Holloway sat at the head of the table. Delphine's lawyer, a brisk woman named Adiz, who I later learned had talked Delphine out of 3 separate impulsive decisions during the process, sat across from mine. Delphine signed first. Her handwriting, usually loose and slanted, came out careful and small, like she was concentrating harder than the moment required. When it was my turn, I held the pen for a moment longer than necessary. I thought about the porch light, flickering before it caught. I thought about my mother's voice reading itself into the room through a stranger, forgiving us before we'd even done anything wrong. I thought about the version of myself who might have signed away her own future 11 months ago just to avoid a difficult conversation. I signed. Outside, in the parking lot, Delphine and I stood for a moment without speaking. The house was legally mine now, fully, unambiguously, honestly mine, and something about that fact sat strangely in my chest, heavier than triumph, lighter than grief. "I never actually wanted you gone," Delphine said finally, looking at her shoes. "I wanted to stop feeling like the only way I could exist was in the space you left behind." "I know," I said. And I did know, finally, in a way I hadn't a year before. "I hope you find that space that isn't built out of taking mine." She almost smiled. Therapist talk. "I've been going," I admitted. "You should try it." "Maybe," she said, which from Delphine was practically a promise. Spring came, and with it, an invitation I hadn't expected, a small card in the mail, Delphine's handwriting on the front, inviting me to a soft opening. Larkspur, the restaurant was called. I recognized the name before I even stepped inside. She'd named it after the street our mother's house sat on, the house she'd once demanded I disappear over. The loan had gone through, legitimately, with my signature as guarantor and no shortcuts taken. It hadn't been easy. There had been another argument in February over budget projections, a tense phone call in March when she'd wanted to ask me for more than we'd agreed. But each time, instead of folding or exploding, we'd found something narrower and steadier, a boundary held without cruelty, a no that didn't require a punishment attached to it. The restaurant was small and warm, string lights strung along one exposed brick wall, and on a shelf near the register, unexpectedly, I found a framed photograph of our mother in her 30s, laughing at something off camera, younger than I could really remember her being. "I didn't know you had that picture," I said. "I found it going through boxes," Delphine said, coming to stand beside me. "I thought about keeping it for myself. Then I thought, no, she belongs to both of us. Everything always did." I was just too scared to believe there was enough of her to go around. I looked at our mother's laughing face, at the restaurant built from an honest loan instead of a stolen signature, at my sister standing beside me instead of across from me for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit. "There was always enough," I said. "You just had to stop competing for it." I still live in the house. The porch light still flickers before it catches. I never did get around to replacing it, and eventually I stopped wanting to. There's something honest about a light that hesitates before it commits to shining. It reminds me of myself, that year, learning slowly that boundaries aren't cruelty, and that truth, however uncomfortable, is a form of love too. Delphine comes for dinner sometimes now, on Sundays, the way we used to when our mother was alive, and dinner meant something more than obligation. We don't talk about the lien anymore, or the bank, or the year she asked me to vanish, so she could finally feel like she'd won. We talk about the restaurant's regulars, about small things, about nothing, which is its own kind of victory after everything that came before. Sometimes, standing under that flickering porch light waiting for her car to pull into the driveway, I think about what my mother wrote. "Whichever of you is doing this out of fear, I forgive you before you even ask," and I understand now that forgiveness was never the hard part. The hard part was learning to stop disappearing quietly so someone else could feel whole. I didn't sell the house to punish my sister. I bought it to stop being erased by her. And in the space that honesty made, somehow, slowly, unexpectedly, we both found room to exist. The porch light flickers, and then it catches and it holds.